Hey everybody, welcome back to another Film of the Week. Hope you guys been enjoying the content on the channel as of late. This is going to be an interesting Film of the Week because I have been eager to talk about this film for a little while. I've been trying to work it up to watch this because I just been kind of 50-50 with like viewing film lately. I mean, I love talking about films still and viewing movies absolutely still, but it's the degree of it, I just, I'm just kind of taking it piece by piece nowadays. And I'm not so like eager to watch stuff. Um, but this I did want to watch because I've been putting it off for like months, and I finally, through uh, through the through the ending of my subscription to HBO Max, which was literally today, or at least it was supposed to be, but I forgot to cancel it, so now I have another month, which is a good thing, but then also I probably should have canceled it. Um, but we're going to talk about this film because I've heard some interesting things about it, and like I said, I've been eager to watch it for the past couple of months, so finally decided to check this film out. And that film that we're discussing this week is Tokyo Story, which was directed by Yashiro Ozu, who is a fairly well-known filmmaker, uh, at least in the of Japanese culture. Directed films, some notable films such as Late Spring, which came out in 1949, and what followed after Tokyo Story, a film called An Autumn Afternoon, as well as a couple of other features here and there. But Tokyo Story, of course, his most notable piece, as far as I can tell, um, and released in 1953, and it tells a story of a aging couple, an aging couple who travel to Tokyo, where a bunch of their children now reside, and they go visit them for what seems to be that of a weekend, essentially, or at least a couple of days. And within their trip, they get to seeing how their children have evolved and have grown over time. They see their perspectives, how they're managing themselves, their children, hence their grandchildren, and through this, it is a viewing of the stages of the human life, and within such the life, depending on the time of which it's in, the inconveniences that come between the generations, that come between that of the elderly, the adults, the youth, and what inevitably brings them together, and in this case, something fairly tragic. Um, and the film has been hailed quite a bit. A lot of people seem to really, really admire this film, mainly for its emotional center and for how it portrays the ideas of family and the ideas of bondage. And I do believe that the thematic interest of the film is that, as I've said, is about the stages of life and perspective of things and priorities that are within certain points of people's livelihoods. And the thing about the dissection that I found interesting is that within the portrayals of these three generations, the youth, the adult, and the elderly, there seems to be that of a progression within the ideology that also in some ways kind of devolves over time. With the youth, there's an eagerness. There's always this passion. We want to do this, we want to do that. Where with the adults, there is now a content. This is just the life that I live now. I'm either extremely busy, or in some cases, there's one specifically who there actually isn't a blood relative, just some random stranger who doesn't have all the time in the world and actually is willing to give the aging couple so much of her time and so much of her attention because of a lack of activity in her own personal life, but a contentment for how things are present. And then, of course, the elderly, where there is regret and then there's guilt, looking back on things, seeing where the road has been, how the road has formed, to which ultimately where the road is about to end, this journey is about to end. So looking back on it, they're seeing mistakes, they're seeing how they could have improved through their children, seeing that some of their children are struggling, seeing that they are not doing the best that they could, or in their eyes, the best that they could, their full potential being explored. Um, and, just flat out, just disappointment, seeing as where their children are and seeing some of them as just frankly disappointments and not being um, as, as proud as some parents might be, with in viewing their children. They want their children to do more in life and not just doing some certain things. So, in that idea, within its dissection, I think it's fairly informative in how it provides the distinctions through this very observational lens. Because a lot of the time it is, very observant, and it resides in that, absolutely. Visually, it's interesting. I'm always a sucker for black and white, so it's just, the aspect ratio and how things look within the frame. You're going to get me there. So visually, it looks kind of interesting. And that thematic distinctions, between the characters and also within not just the packaging of it, I think that how it feeds to the ideas of the film, I think that also feeds into the performances to some extent. Giving them some kind of life and substance without actually having to speak those ideas, out. It's pretty, for how it is, it's, like I said, it's very observant, and within that, it's very nonverbal in how it portrays these ideas between that of the elderly, between that the adults. It's all to do within the conversations that these characters have with each other, and in that you get an understanding of how each perspective is, how one person may view another as a disappointment, or how the other may view someone as a need to help them, or as a burden to some extent, because of just how they come into their lives, or just them in their lives at the present moment is perhaps not the best time per se. And there is also that discussion about time, how one chooses to use their time, and ultimately, the consequences of perhaps not using your time properly. And when things happen and you don't have that time anymore, perhaps then there is only that of regret and guilt that may shape, So it does have a lot of color when it comes to its overall ideas. But I think that where the film ultimately struggles for me is a lot to do within the actual narrative itself, because while it is very observant, I think that its narrative, its story, I think is fairly uneventful. And there are some people who use that term and, don't actually see the plotting that takes place. But in my perspective of things, how I look at this, I just feel that a lot of the plotting and the sense of depth that I'm, illustrating, I feel it just becomes rather insubstantial within the overall presentation and how that story plays out. Because essentially what the story is that it's about these Asian couple wandering around Tokyo and, observing their children, observing their past friends, their past events. And that may, in fact, be interesting, but the film also takes an interest in showing us the perspective of the children and showing us the perspective of their lives and interplaying with that to, again, present this idea of the stages of life and what their priorities are and their concerns are in these present moments. And that is an interesting piece of commentary, especially in the vein of family, in the vein of just mentalities. But I feel like the measurement of that impact, that emotional impact, is pretty short, given just, again, how it represents it, fairly uneventful things are. And it kind of revels in those sensibilities. And plus, talking on a technical front, I just feel that its edits are not as inspired. It's very simple. If someone finishes a sentence and then they cut to the next person, they finish the sentence and they come back and they finish the sentence. Like, there's no interplay that feels creative or juicy, or creating that of the drama, or creating that of the more of the weight to the circumstance. It just feels like everyone's kind of waiting their turn. It doesn't feel like that there is a spice to the edit. It just feels rather simple. Um, so so for what it is, I think that thematically there's very interesting commentary to take place here, and in that I think that there is some level of intrigue that you can gain from it. Um, and I said visually interesting, and performances are not completely without merit because of just what the thematic ideas are bearing. But I just feel that its observant quality and how it utilizes that observant quality creates a fair amount of distance, unfortunately. And it makes so that the story doesn't feel as weightful in terms of its overall structuring and its overall plotting. It just feels a bit uneventful, like I said, and rather just, like I said, just doesn't feel as substantial to sustain its runtime or to really maintain a higher form of interest. So I appreciate thematically what it's trying to do. I think that it is a very interesting dissection, but I think that literal dissection, how it chooses to peel these layers, is more interesting in overall dialogue and less to do in a visual medium. So there's some interesting writing there, but in terms of how it represents it on a visual front, it just feels very mute, unfortunately. And I wish so that the visual quality of the film it will match the overall writings that is embedded with. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on Tokyo Story. I think it's okay. I don't love it. There's apparently a lot of people who love it, but I am just not one of those. I just think of it to be an interesting piece of commentary, but as an overall story, in terms of an overall narrative, I feel that it just feels like it's lacking. In terms of what it's talking about, there's a lot there, but I think in terms of just the story that it is residing in, it just doesn't feel like there's a lot there. But you guys, what are your thoughts on Tokyo Story? If you have seen it, just, I liked the overall manner of the film. I liked the overall attitudes, but I just wish that the story itself just had more things going on. There's some little things here and there, like there's some little pieces that give you an insight to the past of these children, and within the father and the mother, the father being that of a potential drinker back in his day, the mother perhaps having conflicts with him back then, but they never are fully explored. They're just little things that they kind of sprinkle in, and that might be interesting if the overall direction felt earnest in that way, but I feel as though that it needed to explore these things further to actually heighten the narrative itself and heighten the drama that's taking place. As it stands, I just feel like it's rather mute and uneventful. It just feels just the perfect word to describe it. But thematically, though, definitely has a lot there to chew on. But you guys, what are your thoughts on Tokyo Story? If you guys have seen it, and your thoughts on this director, if you guys have seen his other work, I'm curious to see if his other work kind of match in the spirit of this film. But let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.